kindergartners, welcome back to chapter 3 of My Father's Dragon. If you're just joining us right now, I would love for you to make sure that you have your map out, and on the back is all the things that Elmer packed in his knapsack, if you remember that. So make sure you have this out today for when we read chapter 3. We also need to do our recap of what happened in chapter 2. And if you remember, in chapter 2, the cat told the little boy what he saw that made him weep when he went to Wild Island. And he saw the baby dragon. And what happened with the baby dragon was he fell out of the clouds. I'll show you that picture again. And he landed on Wild Island, where the animals had been too lazy to walk all the way around the river. So you can see how the river went right through Wild Island. So when the animals had to cross, they had to go all the way around the river. And so they decided to use the baby dragon as their way to get across. And if you remember, they tied a giant rope around his neck. And if he tried to fight and not do what they said, they would twist his wings and they would hurt the poor baby dragon. And so that's what the cat saw. So she decided to tell the boy that she thinks she knows all the advice that she could give him in order for him to go over to Wild Island and free the baby dragon. So he was going to hop on the ship and sail first to the island of Tangerina, and then he would head on over to Wild Island. And that's the page that we ended with. But right before we ended, the story told us all the things that he packed in his knapsack. And his name is Elmer. It starts right up here with that E. And remember, another word for knapsack, which we learned yesterday, is backpack. And he had some very odd things in his knapsack. Odd means strange. Some of the things made sense, but some of the things were interesting. So let's read them again. If you take yours out, you can point along with me. We're going to start right here. This was chewing gum. 24, which if you remember, that means 24 pink lollipops. A pack of rubber bands, black rubber boots, a compass. And if you remember, a compass is a little tool that shows us which direction to go, especially if you're out camping or hiking. It's an outdoor tool. A toothbrush and toothpaste, 6 magnifying glasses, a sharp jackknife, a comb and a hairbrush, 7 hair ribbons, an empty grain sack labeled cranberry, clean clothes, and 25 PB&J sandwiches, and 6 apples. So some of these things make sense, and you might think, well, that would make sense if you were going on an adventure to bring. But other things are very curious and puzzling. So today we're going to read chapter 3. And we're going to see what happens to the little boy whose name is Elmer. And we're going to see if this is the chapter where he might get to meet the dragon. That's how we spell the word dragon, okay? So let's see. Chapter 3 is called My Father Finds the Island. My father hid in the hold for 6 days and nights. Well, right away, we open with a line that barely makes sense. Do you know what a hold is? A hold is the bottom part of the ship. Okay, so he's hiding basically in the attic of the ship or way down below. Twice he was nearly caught when the ship stopped to take on more cargo. That means more stuff. But at last he heard a sailor say that the next port would be Cranberry, and they'd be unloading all the wheat there. So on your map, you can find Cranberry. It's right here. And that's the port he's going to. And it means like a ship port when we take an airplane, you go to an airport. This would be the ship port, so where the ship is going to land. My father knew the sailors would send him right home if they caught him. So he looked inside his knapsack and he took out a rubber band and the empty grain bag with the label saying cranberry. So that's one of our things that he had in his knapsack. He took out the empty sack and he took out one rubber band out of his pack. At the last moment, my father climbed inside the bag, knapsack and all, and he folded the top of the bag over his head, and he put a rubber band around the top. He didn't look exactly like all the other bags in the hold, but it was the best he could do. So if you look really close at this picture, you can see that these two bags must have grain in them. Grain like what we make bread out of. But this sack you can see is hiding the little boy. You can see his head right there. So that was the cat's good plan. That was a very smart plan. Soon the sailors came to unload. They lowered a big net into the hold and began moving the bags of wheat. Suddenly one sailor yelled, "Great Scott! This is the queerest bag of wheat I've ever seen. It's all lumpy like, but the label says it's supposed to go to Cranberry." What was in that bag? The little boy was, huh? The other sailors looked at the lumpy bag too, and my father, who was in the bag, of course, tried even harder to look like a bag of wheat. Then another sailor felt the bag, and he just happened to get a hold of my father's elbow. "Oh, I know what this is," he said. "This here is a bag of dried corn on the cob." And he dumped my father in the bag into the big net, along with all the other bags of wheat. This all happened in the late afternoon, so late that the merchant who was buying the sacks of wheat in Cranberry didn't count his bags until the next morning. The sailors told the captain, and the captain wrote down on a piece of paper that they had delivered 160 bags of wheat and 1 bag of dried corn on the cob. They left the piece of paper for the merchant and sailed away that evening. My father heard that later the merchant spent the whole next day counting and recounting the bags, trying to find the bag of dried corn on the cob. But he never found it, because as soon as it was dark that night, my father climbed out of the bag, folded it up, and put it back in his knapsack. He walked along the shore to a nice sandy place, and he lay down to sleep. So he's made it. He's made it to his first stop, which is the port of Cranberry on this island right here on our map. Okay. Let's see what it says next. My father was very hungry when he woke up the next morning. Just as he was looking to see if he had anything left to eat, something hit him on the head. It was a tangerine. He had been sleeping right under a tree full of big, fat tangerines. And then he remembered that this island was called the Island of Tangerina. Tangerine trees grew wild everywhere. My father picked as many as he had room for, which was 31, and he started off to find Wild Island. He walked and walked and walked along the shore, looking for the rocks that joined the two islands. Can you find those rocks on your map? They're right here. They join the two islands together like a bridge. Do you see that? He's looking for those rocks. He walked all day, and once when he met a fisherman and asked him about Wild Island, the fisherman began to shake, and he couldn't talk for a long time. It scared him that much, even thinking about the island. Finally, he had said, "Many people have tried to explore Wild Island, but not one has come back alive. We think they were eaten by the wild animals." This didn't bother my father. He kept walking and he slept on the beach again that night. It was beautifully clear the next day, and way down the shore, my father could see the long line of rocks leading out into the ocean. And way out at the end of the rocks, he could see a tiny patch of green. He quickly ate 7 tangerines and started down the beach. It was almost dark when he came to the rocks, but there, way out in the ocean, was that patch of green, Wild Island. He sat down and rested a while, remembering that the cat had said, "If you can, go out to the island at night, because then the wild animals won't see you coming along the rocks, and you can hide when you get there." So my father picked 7 more tangerines, put on his black rubber boots, and waited for dark. It was a very black night, and my father could hardly see the rocks ahead of him. Sometimes they were quite high, and sometimes the waves almost covered them, and they were slippery and hard to walk on. Sometimes the rocks were far apart, and my father had to get a running start and leaped from one to the next. After a while, my father began to hear a rumbling noise. It grew louder and louder as he got nearer to the island. At last, it seemed as if he were right on top of the noise. And he was. He had jumped from a rock onto the back of a small whale who was fast asleep and cuddled up between 2 rocks. The whale was snoring and making more noise than a steam shovel, so it never heard my father say, "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't know that was you." And it never knew my father had jumped on its back by mistake. For 7 long hours, my father climbed and slipped and leapt from rock to rock. But while it was still dark, he finally reached the very last rock and stepped off onto Wild Island. Look at that picture. There he is. He didn't even know that he was walking on top of the whale. And now we're on chapter 4. But today, we're going to do a couple things on our map because we have it right here. So I've given you your expo marker too. Now the neat thing about these is I've put a special coating on them so we can draw right on here and then we can wipe it off afterwards, okay? So first on our map, we want to put where the little boy went. So first, we should put an X on Cranberry because that was the port that he went to. So you can put a little dot or you could put a little X. I think maybe I'll put a little dot. So look, there it is, because that's where he landed. Now, if you look really carefully, you can actually see the ocean rocks, and then right here, it says, sleeping whale snoring. So let's draw a line across those rocks, kind of like a dot to dot, because that's where he went, right? So he went from here all the way past the sleeping whale, and he landed right on Wild Island. That's where he is. Good job. So you can really check out Wild Island and maybe predict means tell what's coming next. Maybe you have an idea of what different wild animals he's going to find on Wild Island. Now let's flip it over and hit the knapsack page. And there were some things that we heard that he used already. So let's go down the list. he used one rubber band, right? So I don't want to cross out the whole thing, but maybe I'll put an X next to it because he did use one of those rubber bands, didn't he? So we can put an X next to that. He didn't use the whole pack, but he used one when he was on the ship. Now, his black rubber boots, didn't it say that he wore those? He wore those to cross the rocks. So we could put an X or a line straight through black rubber boots. Now, if you don't want to put a line through yours, you could put an X next to it to show that he used it. Or you could put a check mark next to it like this to show that he used his black rubber boots. Now, the other thing we heard that he used was the empty grain sack labeled cranberry. And if you look down at the bottom, it's actually 2 lines. It's sort of this dark red color, and it says empty grain sack labeled cranberry. So it's on 2 different lines. And he used that. So I'm actually going to take my marker and cross it off, and I'll show you what that looks like when I'm finished if you want to make yours look the same way. Okay, so I crossed off the things that Elmer has used on his trip. You might want to do a check mark. You might want to put an X. This is yours to draw on, so you have to decide what works for you. I'm just going to cross it out to make it easier for my eyes to see. So today we mapped his journey on our map, right? We marked his trail. And we crossed out the things that he's used from his knapsack. So it was a busy chapter. All right, you guys, I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you'll tune in tomorrow for chapter 4 of My Father's Dragon. We still haven't met the dragon, but at least now he's on Wild Island. All right, so I'll see you tomorrow. There's no place like home. Bye.